Hello, we are Team One. Our project is titled Solidifying Our Commitment to Agricultural Conservation by Diversifying Our Approach. We are working with the Nature Conservancy, specifically their North American Agricultural Division, and the focus of their work is in preserving water quality through land conservation as well as agricultural land stewardship. My name is Rasha Mohammed, and presenting alongside me today are Keone Bailey and Chantel Vincent. Our partner Sam Tang couldn't be here with us today, and our team is being led by our faculty advisor, Dr. Leslie Huey, faculty at the School of Urban and Regional Planning. So, as you can imagine, tackling such a broad, complex, and deeply rooted issue as diversity, equity, and inclusion will bring about some challenges. We've had to reckon with and learn the history of conservation work in the United States, which has a racial past of land exclusion for BIPOC farmers that still carries prevalence today. Coupled with learning that past is understanding the Nature Conservancy and their mission of focusing on water quality through land conservation and the communities that are not represented in that work. We spent a lot of time studying TNC's initial diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts to better identify the scope of our project, while also accumulating examples and case series that have served as useful lessons and recommendations as TNC looks to move forward in this work. The Nature Conservancy's North American Agricultural Division is focused on preserving water quality and conservation primarily through agricultural land management. TNC works towards improved freshwater quality in the Great Lakes and Mississippi watersheds by working to reduce water pollution through promoting more healthy agricultural and conservation practices. The intensive use of fertilizers in agriculture play a dominant role in water pollution. They work with stakeholders who have the biggest impact, which tends to result in partnerships with primarily white row crop farmers. TNC recognizes that it's not been able to create meaningful and mutually beneficial relationships with BIPOC farmers, and might also be contributing to or complicit in the agricultural division and land exclusion BIPOC farmers are subject to. With this in mind, the Ag team is seeking a multifaceted effort around diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is the scope of our project.
So we had the joy of kind of dividing our time amongst two primary deliverables in partnership with TNC throughout the year. And you can see here that time was split primarily between a case series and an organizational index. And so speaking first about the case series, this was a compilation of different organizations that we felt were successful in some sort of DEI transition or pilot project. We took examples from a broad scope and tried to whittle them down into a group of cases that would be most helpful for TNC to make their own transition as they considered how to do this in an effective manner throughout their sort of DEI arc. The second is an organizational index. This is a grouping of organizations throughout primarily the Midwest that either work directly with or represent or empower BIPOC farmers or laborers in the region. And we are providing this primarily in conjunction with the case series with the hope that TNC has the ability to make synergy between the two using our recommendations from the case series and having an outlet to potentially build partnerships moving forward. And so this brings us a little bit more to the case series. And so I told you we took a broad scope, and it took a long time to kind of figure out what would be most relevant from a learning perspective for this organization, knowing that they're so large and have a large presence in the region. And so we had lots of conversations about what would be most effective for them or most telltale. And so this broke down into three primary sectors, which are parallel organizations that mirror TNC in a lot of their primary work or mission. Industry examples, such as industries from all kinds of sectors, but ones that were most emblematic of how they are pushing the forefront of DEI in their own work. And finally, TNC released their first Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Justice report this summer actually. And because they're such a large organization, there's not as much conversation amongst them that they actually had a lot to learn from themselves. And so we had the opportunity to talk to some of their leaders within their organization who may not be within their row crop strategy, which is our direct partner, to kind of learn from them as well. And so we put together a report, and this is a busy slide, but a summary of how that sort of came together. And so you'll see 6 different themes that we've drawn from 11 different case studies that we ultimately included in our manuscript, which we'll be presenting in full to them next week, actually. And so you can see several things here: accountability and transparency, a formalized DEI committee, leveraging the skill sets and resources of TNC or the organization that's considered to build the capacity of their partner, using pilot projects to figure out the nuances of how to be effective, relationship building, and ultimately asking for help, using consults who have experience in this space. And so we've marked where we think strengths are in certain organizations, and we'll be presenting this to them, like I mentioned, next week.
And now to get into our second main deliverable that we have already given to TNC. As Keone mentioned, we put together an organizational index of almost 100 different organizations that are headquartered in or work in the Midwest region that our TNC division focuses in. And we've provided them with this list of people who work in the agricultural or food spaces and are either led by BIPOC individuals, directly support BIPOC communities, or have DEI as a specific goal within their programs. And we're hoping that this will serve as a tool for TNC to start to build new partnerships once they've taken into account all of the recommendations that we've put forward, and that I'll explain in just a second, and as well as accounting with all of the history that we've presented and the different opportunities that could be present within the case series. So this document not only provides just the name of the organizations, but it also provides the location of their headquarters, the leadership structure, so the names and of all the higher-ups within the organization that TNC could reach out to, the main goals of the organization, the detailed list of all the projects they work on and what they do for BIPOC communities that they serve, as well as any additional strengths or weaknesses that they may bring to a partnership with TNC. And then, of course, contact information and other ways to find more information about these partners or potential partners. And so we're hoping that TNC will eventually reach out to some or all of these partners, again, once they've done the work necessary within the organization based off of these recommendations that we've provided. So these are our 3 main takeaway recommendations based primarily on our case series of how TNC should take our work and grow going forward. The first big one is that TNC, the ag team, needs to reflect on why do they care about DEI. It's not enough just to say, oh, of course we care about DEI because it's important. They need to look within themselves and say, why do we actually care, more than just using BIPOC communities as a token, more than just saying, oh, we can put on our website that we work with diverse communities. They need to really understand why they care about it. And this also means that they need to look within themselves, both within their team, and each of them needs to truly reflect on creating an effective mission statement and methods to track their progress and see how DEI is moving forward in their organization. So we've seen in a lot of the case series that this can involve a lot of discussions between the team of a legitimate mission statement, which really articulates their why and what they would like to do moving forward. And lastly, really the big one is that TNC's ag team needs to reconcile its relationship with BIPOC communities, and this can involve admitting the part that agriculture has played in really just a racist past that has harmed people, and that the ag team or TNC itself has played. So this is, again, a lot of self-reflection that we're recommending to TNC before they begin reaching out and making partnerships. All right. And of course, we'd like to acknowledge all the support by the Dow Company Foundation, Dow Sustainability Fellows, and TNC. Any questions?
Great, we have time for a few questions. Alex?
Can you talk a little bit more about how you put the index together?
Sorry. I want to capture this and make sure we've got it for the video.
Just talk a little more about how you put the index together, please.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the index was created based in part on based in part on just web searches, and a lot of that led to an initial maybe article on some organization or a list of different organizations that are actually a cooperative of many different organizations that led down a rabbit hole that eventually led to something. Or we also got recommendations from our advisor or different faculty members or staff at U of M who we spoke to, who recommended things like the Michigan Wild Rice Initiative, which is a group of 12 Michigan tribes working together to restore the wild rice, which is a really important indigenous crop. And so we really just took on a life of its own in some ways of you find one organization and you find all of its partners, and that just grows the list further and further. So it was kind of a hodgepodge approach. And we provided TNC with all of the different keywords or the method that every organization was found in kind of a subsection of the index.
Other questions?
I'm curious if you could reflect a little bit on how your recommendations maybe overlapped or extended some of the things that you learned from the DEI report that the TNC put together.
Yeah, of course. That's a great question. And obviously, this is a very complicated topic, and it's really hard to distill DI into 10 minutes or even an hour or a day. And so I would love to have an opportunity to talk about some of the case studies themselves, because I think they're really reflective of how our recommendations emerged. And that's what we'll plan to do next week with their team. In terms of the DEI report that was released by TNC, part of the reason that we engaged with some of their internal members, and just to kind of give you more background, TNC is a global organization and they have a US sort of base. And the partners that we worked with or talked to and had the chance to interview with were all within sort of the US or Canadian region. But their actual report wasn't so much a recommendations or process planning of how they're doing their work. It was more so a expose, so to speak, of like, here are the people who are doing this kind of work and what regions they're in. And it was sort of a highlighting rather than a plan forward from the DEIJ report that TNC released this summer. And I think in speaking with some of their leadership, their plans are to propose and to establish a more formalized way forward from an organizational perspective, both from a top-down and hopefully bottom-up approach. But the reason that we had so many of these conversations was because that middle ground was missing. And so we're hoping with this and in further conversations that middle ground comes together. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Any more questions? Time for a couple questions. You haven't had enough caffeine yet? Hold on a second. I'll get you.
Great. Thanks so much. Thank you for a very nicely organized presentation. I wanted to ask you, and I asked this in my complete ignorance, how is the Nature Conservancy interacting with the U.S. Department of Agriculture around some of their efforts recently to address the inequities that have come in practices of support and funding for BIPOC farmers?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and one that our partner contact, Mary, has been speaking with us more recently about. I can't answer that in full on TNC's behalf. I think what I can say and what we can say as a team is that TNC recognizes that a lot of these funding routes that have been asked or proposed from the Department of Agriculture or other funding sources, which TNC has their finger on the pulse to, are starting to require or starting to ask a lot of what does DEI look like in this project proposal? What is your relationship in terms of metrics? What is your relationship with established partners in terms of sustainability in a way that we would consider to be more just than has been done previously? And in part, to get that funding, you have to have a track record of doing some sort of work or having some sort of plan. And so our hope is with this, it gives them at least a nudge in the right direction or an opportunity to have details that they can provide to receive funding to build on this work. And so I can't answer your question specifically, but I know that this is a conversation that they're having in terms of relationships with funding structures on a national level, including the Department of Agriculture.